Riddle me this. Why, and you'll hear the interview again, 9 days ago, the Prime Minister assured me there was nothing wrong. He'd not done anything wrong. So why now, as this drip, drip, drip? I mean, they're like Thames Water the way this is going, aren't they? They really are one of those failing water companies. This story, who's doing their PR? Gerald Ratner. It is who's he, Nick? Look it up. Look it up. It's all to do with the demise of a jewellery company. It goes on and on. It's like children in charge. Sir Keir Starmer has repaid £6,000 worth of hospitality and gifts he received since entering number 10, but will keep more than £40,000 worth of suits for himself, dresses and outfits for his wife, and football tickets. £40,000 worth. Now, I know footy tickets are expensive, I get all of that, and his glasses come in at £2,500, but how much are each of these suits? I mean, look, I do not expect him to go down to Primark or Next. I get it, and he needs to look smart, but this is a bit odd, isn't it? And you're all piling in. I can see the emails, social media. Oh, not going back to this. It's not me. It's them. He's just decided to pay the £6,000. He's the one who keeps bringing it back like a bad meal. Now, I take you back last week to the Labour Party conference in Liverpool when I had an opportunity to speak with Sir Keir. And I started the interview by asking him about the number of freebies and donations he'd accepted, given the way it had dominated our conversation over the previous couple of weeks. I asked him why listeners and voters should believe his claim that we're all in this together. He just said that in the conference hall, when he gladly allowed a wealthy donor to buy him his suits and some specs and taken donations for an array of music and sports events.
Well, look, Nick, I understand why questions are asked about things like donations. Some of my donations were things like clothes in the busy period running up to an election. I'm on the road, I'm focused on what I'm doing. People come forward and say I can help and make a donation towards clothes or something like that.
Why do you suppose they do that?
Well, I mean, in this particular case, it was a Labour peer, so he's got nothing to gain. He just wanted us to win the election, and that's why he did it. But look, Nick, let me be just really clear to you. I mean, look, I understand why you're asking me questions. And
we will move on from this, but we need to
know.
know.
That's important for me to say. Look, you know, that was opposition. We're now in government, and therefore you won't be seeing any declarations from me in relation to clothing. Now we're in government. It's a different, you know, we've turned a page, if you like.
Can you say, to use a footballing term, can you say sorry for an own goal?
Well, look, there was no breach of the rules or anything like that. We complied with everything.
But it has dominated part of this conference, and there is a cloud. So can you say, sorry, this was an own goal?
Look, Nick, I'm not going to apologise for not doing anything wrong, but I am going to recognise that you're asking me questions and people have asked questions. And I do understand
But if it's not doing anything wrong, why don't you carry on doing it?
Well, because I think, you know, when you're running around in opposition, trying to just focus on winning that election, and people come forward and say, let me give you a bit of help with that, that's one thing. Now we're in government, that's another thing, which is why I've taken the decision, right or wrong, that I'm not going to be taking donations from clothes again. There won't be any more declarations like that. That was Liverpool Tuesday of last week. To Brussels yesterday, the PM announcing this change in his position on donations and his explanation.
We came in as a government of change. We are now going to bring forward principles for donations because until now politicians have used their best individual judgment on a case-by-case basis. I think we need some principles of general application. So I took the decision that until the principles are in place, it was right for me to make those repayments.
And it fell to Energy Minister Sarah Jones to be on what they call the morning round this morning. She was talking about an initiative to try and get growth restarted, but obviously the conversation moved on. I asked her what the criteria is for what the PM will pay for and what he won't.
Well, he's commissioned a new set of principles on gifts and hospitality as part of our updated ministerial code, and in advance of that, he
was doing something wrong.
Several items. He's broken no rules.
Well, why do we need principles then?
We are looking again at those rules. He has broken no rules, and it's really important to say that.
But Minister, if nothing's broken, why do we need new principles?
Because I think we have, in the past, in the previous government, the issue was always about transparency, right? It was about people not declaring things when they should have done. This is not a question of that. Everything has been declared as it should be. But we are looking again at those rules on hospitality, and we will update those shortly. And the Prime Minister, in advance of that, has paid several entries in his register since he became Prime Minister. There is a difference between being in government and being in opposition, which he has recognised. When you are a minister with the actual levers of power, it is a different situation, and he has made the decision to do that in advance of those hospitality rules being updated.
Doesn't lastly it look a bit odd for the new Prime Minister retain glasses and suits but pay back for other gifts?
Well, look, those were essentially campaign donations to enable us to run a campaign and to fight for a Labour government. It's different, I think, from what happens in government. And one of the things that we're changing is this slightly bizarre rule where government ministers don't have to declare hospitality, but opposition shadow ministers do. We're going to declare that. So government ministers have to declare those hospitalities as well.
Will the Deputy Prime Minister be repaying the £840 she got towards her trip to Ibiza in August?
Well, look, I'm not going to get into that. I don't know. The Prime Minister has made a decision to update those principles. He's made a decision
just lastly,
why would other people to make those decisions.
Why would one pay back and not another? What's the rationale?
Well, the Prime Minister who's running the country has made that decision. It's for others to make their decision. But the Prime Minister
would you urge
has made
her to pay the money back?
No, I would not. Nobody, again, and I should stress this, has broken any rules, but we are looking at those principles again, and I think that's the right thing to do.
To a man who's unfortunately had to deal with a number of political crises in his time, Guto Harri was Downing Street Director of Communications with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, also worked with Boris Johnson as London Mayor at City Hall, and he joins me now. It's difficult to explain why this goes on. What should they have done at the first sounding of this story, Guto? Morning to you.
Good morning to you. The important thing is to get your story straight and your principles straight, and to sort of say as Prime Minister that you need some sort of, inevitably, it'll be some ghastly ex-civil servant, straight to the good, he'll subcontract his judgment to, and then they will lay down in fine detail all kinds of things that should just be common sense. What he's done is acknowledge that he messed up because he's paid some back. But he's put his colleagues in an impossible situation because they now look a bit sort of dodgy for not paying back. But he's also paid back a fraction. It's a little bit like the guy who breaks into your house, nicks your TV, your Sonos, your Alexa, whatever you listen to LBC on. And then you see him in the pub. He acknowledges that he's the thief. But he says, tell you what, I'll give you your Alexa back. And you're meant to be grateful and ignore the fact he's still got the TV and everything else.
Now, my listeners will be raging and raving, and they'll say, come on, we've just come out of administration that had everything from wallpaper to Prosecco to birthday cake to tractor porn. How would you respond?
Well, none of that amounted to £100,000. And I don't think Boris ever went out to the building, nor Rishi, nor Liz, as I understand it, nor James Cleverly when he was a fantastic foreign secretary, wearing a suit that they hadn't paid for themselves, or wearing glasses that they hadn't paid for themselves. And I think, as we discussed before, most men are not really very happy with the idea of another man buying clothes for their wife. So there's something still fundamentally weird about all of this. But this attempt all the time to somehow say the Tories are bad and we're great. We do it differently because we're better people, because we're Labour, because we're of the left. We can do this stuff and it's not grubby. If the Tories did the same thing, it's an appalling breach of trust. It's an appalling sort of cashing in on the advantages of being in power.
Guto, how do they bury this?
I suspect somebody is going to pay the price for this. I suspect we're going to see, a pretty high-level scalp sometime between now and Christmas. And it probably, judging by how these things often play out, it'll be unfair. It'll be the person who probably was in the room saying, I wouldn't do this, but he was ignored. I think that's going to happen. That will coincide, I think, with Simon Case's leaving as the top man in the civil service. I'm not sure Sue Gray is long for this world as chief of staff. So, considering that they're only a few months into a new administration, I think, trivial though these things are compared to the life and death issues going on in the Middle East and the Ukraine and the suffering for ordinary people, with fuel bills and all that. Yes, it's trivial compared to that, but it also is something about the character of the people that are in power, and they need to sort it out.
The skills you had as Director of Communications, does it come with some kind of measure? How do you determine damage done and how long this lasts, Guto?
I think, the judgment for me is how does it resonate with ordinary punters? Would they do the same if they were in power? Are they envious? Are they jealous? Are they resentful? And I think the sort of football tickets in a funny kind of way, which he thinks are completely normal. If you could pick one thing, not me, but the average English bloke in particular, the average British bloke these days, and the average British ladette, if there's one thing they would love to do week in, week out, is go to a box and watch their favourite football team. And to just, soak it up week after week after week till you've clocked up 100 grand's worth. I think that still looks like you're taking the proverbial.